They made fun of his weight until he showed them what real power looks like. Marcus Delacroix stood 6 feet tall and weighed 300 pounds, his massive frame filling the doorway of Roosevelt High School's main entrance like a gentle mountain. At 17, he possessed the kind of size that should have commanded respect, but instead drew snickers and whispered comments from students who saw only his soft belly and round face. His dark eyes held intelligence and kindness, though few bothered to look long enough to notice. Marcus had transferred to Roosevelt 3 weeks ago when his family moved across town, and already he dreaded walking these halls. The cafeteria buzzed with typical lunchtime chaos as Marcus navigated between tables, his lunch tray trembling slightly in his hands. He'd learned to move carefully here, avoiding eye contact, seeking the path of least resistance to his usual corner table, but today his careful route was blocked. Well, look what we have here," sneered Jake Morrison, the unofficial king of Roosevelt's junior class. Jake stood barely 5'8", but carried himself with the swagger of someone much larger, his blonde hair perfectly styled, his Letterman jacket immaculate. The human blimp has arrived. Marcus felt his cheeks burn as nearby students turned to watch. Jake's crew flanked him. Tommy Valdez, a wiry kid with mean eyes and quick fists, and Brad Cooper, stocky and aggressive, always eager to prove himself to Jake's approval. The three had made Marcus their favorite target from his very first day. "Excuse me," Marcus mumbled, trying to step around them. "Excuse me?" Jake mocked, pitching his voice higher. "Did you guys hear that?" The whale said, "Excuse me." The surrounding tables erupted in laughter. "Hey, Marcus, how many pizzas did you eat for breakfast this morning?" Marcus's jaw clenched, but he kept walking. "Just ignore them," he told himself. "They'll get bored and move on." It was the same strategy he'd used at his old school, the same advice his grandmother had given him countless times. "Violence never solves anything, mon petit. Be the bigger person." If only she knew how literally he had to be the bigger person every single day. Tommy stepped directly into Marcus's path. "Where are you going, Tubby? We're having a conversation here." "I just want to eat my lunch," Marcus said, quietly, his voice barely audible over the cafeteria noise. "What's that?" "We can't hear you over the sound of your stomach growling," Brad chimed in, causing another wave of laughter. Marcus tried once more to sidestep them, but Jake's hand shot out and knocked the lunch tray from his grasp. The plastic plate clattered to the floor, spilling meatloaf and mashed potatoes across the linoleum. The cafeteria fell silent except for a few scattered giggles. "Oops," Jake said with mock innocence. "Butterfingers. Though I guess when your fingers are that fat, it's hard to hold on to things." Marcus stared down at his ruined lunch, his hands trembling with suppressed emotion. "Don't react," he told himself. "Just walk away." He knelt slowly to clean up the mess, his face burning with shame as students pulled out phones to record his humiliation. "Leave him alone," came a soft voice from across the cafeteria. Sarah Martinez, a quiet girl from Marcus's English class, had half risen from her seat, but Jake's withering glare sent her sinking back down. "Mind your own business, Martinez," Jake snapped, then turned back to Marcus. "Look at him, guys. On his hands and knees where he belongs. Maybe while you're down there you can clean up some of that grease you've been dripping all over our school." Marcus's vision blurred, but not from tears. For just a moment, a different kind of energy coursed through him, muscle memory from countless hours in his grandfather's gym back in New Orleans. His hands, soft-looking but surprisingly strong, clenched into fists. He could end this right now. One movement, one demonstration of what 300 pounds of properly trained mass could do to someone Jake's size. But his grandmother's voice echoed in his mind again. "Your grandfather's gift is not for hurting others, Marcus. It's for protecting those who cannot protect themselves." He gathered the spilled food in silence and walked away, leaving Jake and his crew laughing behind him. The pattern continued for weeks. In the hallways between classes, Jake would accidentally shoulder-check Marcus into lockers, sending his book scattering. In gym class, Tommy would mistakenly throw dodgeballs at Marcus's head, while Coach Harrison conveniently looked the other way. Brad developed a habit of sitting behind Marcus in chemistry class, poking him with pencils and whispering fat jokes just loud enough for nearby students to hear. Through it all, Marcus endured. He ate lunch alone in empty classrooms. He took longer routes between classes to avoid his tormentors. He kept his head down and counted the days until graduation, when he could escape to college and start fresh somewhere else. But Roosevelt High School had a way of making fresh starts impossible. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon in late October. Marcus was leaving his last class when he found his locker vandalized. the word fatso spray-painted in red letters across the metal door. Students gathered to stare and whisper, some taking pictures with their phones. Marcus's hands shook as he fumbled with his combination lock, trying to ignore the growing crowd. Artistic, isn't it? Jake appeared beside him, grinning widely. I call it Portrait of a Loser. That's enough, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a warning tone that Jake completely missed. What was that? Did the Marshmallow Man just threaten me? Jake looked around at his audience, playing to the crowd. I think he did, guys. I think Shamu just grew a backbone. Tommy and Brad flanked Marcus on either side, hemming him in against the lockers. The hallway filled with students eager to witness whatever was about to happen. Someone started, chanting, "Fight, fight, fight," and the energy in the air became electric. You know what your problem is, Marcus. Jake stepped closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that only Marcus could hear. You think, because you're big, you're tough, but underneath all that fat, you're just a scared little boy who can't even stand up for himself. Marcus's breathing became measured and deep, the way his grandfather had taught him during their training sessions. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Center yourself. Find your balance. My grandmother is picking me up today, Marcus said calmly. She's going to see that graffiti on my locker. Jake's grin widened. Oh, is the big baby going to run crying to Grandmama? That's perfect. I was hoping to meet the woman who raised such a pathetic excuse for a man. The words hit Marcus like physical blows, but he remained still, watching Jake's face, reading his movements. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. A true warrior knows when not to fight, Petite, but he also knows when fighting becomes necessary. Tell you what, Jake continued, emboldened by Marcus's silence. When your grandmother gets here, I'll introduce myself. Maybe I'll explain to her what a disgrace her grandson is, how he lets everyone walk all over him because he's too weak and fat to do anything about it. Leave my grandmother out of this, Marcus said, and something in his tone made several students step back instinctively, but Jake was too caught up in his performance to notice the shift in atmosphere. Or what? You'll sit on me? He reached out and poked Marcus in the stomach. What's it like carrying around all that blubber? Do you even see your feet when you look down? The poke became a shove. Marcus didn't move, his 300-pound frame absorbing the impact like a tree weathering a strong wind. Jake shoved harder, putting his full weight behind it. Marcus took a single step backward to maintain his balance, his expression never changing. Look at him, Jake shouted to the crowd. He won't even defend himself. What kind of man just stands there and takes it? The final shove was different. Jake put real malice behind it, trying to send Marcus crashing into the lockers. But Marcus had planted his feet, and Jake might as well have been pushing against a brick wall. The smaller boy bounced backward, stumbling slightly. My turn, Marcus said quietly. The words were spoken so calmly that it took a moment for their meaning to register. When it did, Jake's confident smirk faltered for the first time. Marcus's hand moved faster than anyone expected, especially for someone his size. His palm connected with Jake's chest in what looked like a gentle push, but the impact sent the smaller boy staggering backward 3 full steps, his face contorting in surprise and pain. What the hell? Jake gasped, clutching his chest. That was a love tap, Marcus said, his voice still eerily calm. Would you like to see what happens when I actually try? For the first time since Marcus had known him, Jake Morrison looked uncertain. But pride and audience pressure wouldn't let him back down. You think you scare me, fat boy? I've been in more fights than you've had hot dinners, which is saying something. Jake threw a wild haymaker at Marcus's head. It was a clumsy, telegraphed punch that Marcus could have avoided easily, but instead he let it connect with his jaw. The impact made a solid sound that echoed through the hallway, and Jake's face lit up with triumph, until he realized Marcus hadn't moved. Marcus worked his jaw slightly, testing for damage. Finding none, he looked down at Jake with something resembling pity. Is that really your best punch? The color drained from Jake's face. His hand throbbed from connecting with what felt like a concrete wall, and Marcus was looking at him like he'd been tickled with a feather. Tommy, Brad, Jake called desperately. His friends rushed in from either side, Tommy throwing a quick jab at Marcus's ribs, while Brad aimed for his kidney. Both punches landed solidly, and both boys immediately regretted their decision. It was like punching a heavy bag filled with steel wool. Marcus's response was swift and devastating. His right hand shot out and grabbed Tommy by the front of his shirt, lifting the wiry boy completely off his feet, with casual ease. His left hand caught Brad by the shoulder, fingers digging into pressure points that his grandfather had shown him years ago. Let me show you what 300 pounds can really do, Marcus said, He pulled Tommy close and delivered a belly bump that sent the boy flying backward into a bank of lockers with a crash that reverberated through the entire hallway. Tommy slid down the metal doors and crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. Brad tried to break free, but Marcus's grip was iron. A single punch to the solar plexus doubled the stocky boy over, and when he instinctively bent forward, Marcus brought his knee up to meet Brad's descending face. Not hard enough to break anything, but definitely hard enough to rearrange Brad's immediate priorities. Jake stood frozen, watching his backup crumble in seconds. The crowd had gone completely silent, phones still recording, but their owners too, shocked to remember they were filming. "Just you and me now, Jake," Marcus said, turning his full attention to the ringleader. "Still think I'm just a scared little boy?" Jake's bravado cracked completely. "Look, Marcus, maybe we got off on the wrong foot." "Wrong foot?" Marcus stepped forward and Jake automatically stepped back. "You've been torturing me for weeks. You vandalized my locker. You brought my grandmother into this." Another step forward. "And you thought there would be no consequences?" Jake bumped into the wall behind him, trapped with nowhere to run. Marcus kept approaching until Jake had to crane his neck to look up at him, the size difference suddenly looking enormous from this angle. "I'm sorry, okay? We were just messing around. It was just jokes." "Jokes?" Marcus's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Let me tell you a joke, Jake." Marcus's hands shot out and grabbed Jake by the shoulders, lifting him clean off the ground until they were eye to eye. Jake's feet dangled helplessly as he stared into Marcus's dark eyes, finally, seeing the intelligence and strength he'd overlooked for so long. "The joke is that you spent all this time thinking you were the predator," Marcus said calmly, "when really you were just annoying the sleeping giant." He set Jake down, but kept his hands on the smaller boy's shoulders. "Now I'm going to give you a choice. You can apologize to me right here in front of everyone and we can pretend this never happened. Or what?" Jake whispered. Marcus's grip tightened just enough to make his point. "Or I can show this entire school what happens when someone my size decides to stop being nice." The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Jake looked around desperately for help, but found only staring faces and recording phones. Even his own crew was in no condition to assist him. I'm sorry," Jake mumbled. "Louder," Marcus said firmly. "I'm sorry." Jake's voice cracked slightly. "I'm sorry I called you names and messed with your stuff. I was wrong." Marcus studied his face for a moment, reading the sincerity behind the fear. Finally, he nodded and released Jake's shoulders. Apology accepted, but Jake's humiliation wasn't quite complete. As Marcus turned to walk away, Jake's pride reasserted itself one final time. "This isn't over, fat boy." Marcus stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he turned around. The expression on his face made several students gasp audibly. "You're absolutely right," Marcus said. "It isn't over." What happened next became Roosevelt High School legend. Marcus crossed the distance between them in 2 quick steps. Before Jake could react, Marcus grabbed him around the waist and lifted him high into the air. Jake found himself horizontal, held above Marcus's head like a wrestler's victory pose, his feet kicking helplessly in empty air. "Put me down," Jake screamed. "As you wish," Marcus replied. But instead of setting Jake down gently, Marcus fell backward, bringing all 300 pounds of his body weight down on top of the smaller boy. The impact as they hit the floor sounded like a small earthquake, and Jake's agonized wheeze echoed through the suddenly silent hallway. Marcus bounced slightly. On impact, his considerable bulk crushing the air from Jake's lungs and leaving him gasping like a landed fish. For a moment, Marcus just lay there, his full weight pinning Jake completely flat against the cold linoleum. "Comfortable?" Marcus asked conversationally. Jake could only make small whimpering sounds in response. Marcus pushed himself up into a sitting position, still straddling Jake's torso, his weight distributed across the smaller boy's chest and stomach. "You know, Jake, I've been thinking about what you said, about me being weak and pathetic." He shifted his weight slightly, and Jake's eyes bulged as the pressure increased. "The thing is, weakness isn't about how much you weigh, or how many fights you've won. Weakness is picking on people who can't fight back." Marcus leaned forward, bringing even more of his bulk to bear. "Strength is knowing when to show restraint, but it's also knowing when restraint has run its course." Jake's face was turning red from the pressure, his hands weakly pushing against Marcus's massive thighs. The crowd watched in fascination and horror as their former tormentor was completely dominated by his victim. "Are we clear on the new rules, Jake?" Marcus asked calmly. Jake nodded frantically, unable to speak. "I can't hear you." "Yes," Jake gasped out. "Yes, we're clear." Marcus nodded and slowly rose to his feet, his shadow falling across Jake's prone form. Jake rolled to his side, clutching his ribs and trying to catch his breath, all traces of his former arrogance completely gone. The hallway remained silent for several long seconds. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone started clapping. Others joined in, and soon the applause was thunderous. Students who had watched Marcus's humiliation for weeks were now cheering his victory. Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him, seeing respect where there had once been mockery, admiration where there had been disdain. But more than that, he saw relief. He realized that Jake's reign of terror hadn't been limited to just him, and by standing up for himself, he'd freed others as well. Tommy and Brad had managed to pick themselves up from the floor, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. They helped Jake to his feet, the three former bullies looking small and defeated in the center of the circle. Marcus, Jake's voice was barely audible. This won't happen again. Marcus nodded once. See that it doesn't. As the crowd began to disperse, chattering excitedly about what they'd witnessed, Sarah Martinez approached Marcus with a shy smile. That was incredible, she said. I've never seen anything like it. I hope you never have to see anything like it again, Marcus replied, surprising her with his sincerity. Violence should always be the last resort, but sometimes it's necessary. Marcus thought about his grandfather's teachings, about the difference between using strength to hurt and using strength to protect. Sometimes, he agreed quietly. The following Monday, Marcus arrived at school to find his locker had been cleaned and repainted. A small group of students was waiting for him, including several who had never spoken to him before. They wanted to sit with him at lunch, to include him in their plans, to be associated with the gentle giant who had finally roared. Jake Morrison and his crew still attended Roosevelt High, but their dynamic had fundamentally changed. They walked the halls quietly now, no longer seeking out targets for their cruelty. When they saw Marcus coming, they stepped aside respectfully, their eyes downcast. Marcus didn't take pleasure in their fear, but he couldn't deny the relief he felt at being able to walk through school without constantly looking over his shoulder. More importantly, he noticed other students standing up straighter, speaking up more often, emboldened by his example. 3 months later, as Marcus sat in the cafeteria surrounded by friends, he reflected on the lessons his grandmother had taught him. She'd been right about violence not solving problems, but she'd also taught him something else. Sometimes, Pettit, you must show your strength so that you never have to use it again. Jake Morrison sat alone at a table across the room, picking at his lunch and occasionally glancing toward Marcus's group. There was no hatred in his eyes anymore, just a kind of hollow understanding. He'd learned what happened when you pushed too hard, when you mistook kindness for weakness. Marcus caught his eye and nodded slightly. Jake returned the nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that the war between them was truly over. As the bell rang and students began filing out of the cafeteria, Marcus gathered his things slowly, no longer worried about being late, no longer concerned about who might be waiting for him in the hallways. He'd learned that respect couldn't be demanded or stolen, but it could be earned, and sometimes, just sometimes, it had to be fought for. The gentle giant of Roosevelt High School walked tall through the corridors, his presence now commanding the natural respect that his size and strength deserved. He'd never wanted to be feared, but he'd learned that being underestimated was far more dangerous than being respected. Behind him, Jake Morrison watched from a distance, rubbing his ribs where they still ached on cold mornings, a permanent reminder of what happened when you woke a sleeping giant. The lesson had been learned by everyone involved. True strength wasn't about how much damage you could inflict, but about how much restraint you could show. And when that restraint finally broke, the consequences were as inevitable as gravity itself.